What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr Wargames, and as a lot of you have requested, I've done an update to the Vampire deck. Now, it's very difficult to make this pure Vampire and be playable to a competitive degree, so I have had to use a bit of a Vampire engine, but there are also some very spicy techs throughout the deck that I'll explain as we go through it. As always, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe so you can see more content and not miss out on anything we produce. With all of that out of the way, if you want to see a test stand video or a duel video of this deck, smash that like button, get it to at least 50 likes within the first 24 hours, and I will try and produce one for you for the coming week. Now, let's dive straight first into vampires. Now, these aren't the twinkly, stupid, whatever you want to call them ones. These are actually badass vampires, and as soon as I saw the artwork for the brand new car in Vampire Void, get there eventually, I knew it was going to be awesome. Now, the issue with this card is, yes, it is awesome, but it is very specific. So this one came out in Ghost from the Past, and if it is normal, specifically normal summoned, you can target up to 2 monsters in your opponent's graveyard and special summon those monsters to your field in defense position, but their effects are negated. When a monster's effect is activated while a monster or monsters with the same name is in the graveyard, so even your own graveyard, quick effect, you can just negate the activation. If a monster or monsters is special summoned from your opponent's graveyard, you can tribute 2 monsters to special summon this card from the graveyard. You can only use each effect once per turn. Now, a lot of good things and a lot of bad things. So, good things. Target up to 2 monsters in your opponent's graveyard and special summon them. So it's up to, doesn't need to specifically be 2. It can negate a monster effect as long as one of them's in the graveyard. So if there's already a Nibiru in the graveyard, if there's already a Gamma in the graveyard, if there's already an Ash Blossom in the graveyard, this guy can negate it. You can revive it by tributing 2 monsters. It's a bit of a heavy cost, but it does bring a negate back onto the board. Now, the biggest downside is, it is specifically if this card is normal summoned, and it targets monsters in your opponent's graveyard. So, if your opponent doesn't have monsters in the graveyard, not doing anything. If it doesn't, if it's not normal summoned and it's special summoned, it's not doing a lot. It's just going to be there as a nice negate for monsters. Regardless, in Vampires, it's actually incredibly easy to get out for a normal summon effect, but you've got to keep in mind that in this day and age of Yu-Gi-Oh, going second is very tough, because unless you're playing a Dark Rule No More or turning off your opponent's entire board in order to play through it, you're going to be able to have to play through a couple of monster effects. Going first, it does have its effective nature, because what you can do is, for example, if your opponent wants to activate an Ash Blossom on any of your cards, and you're able to get the normal summon effect coming off of the back of this from Vampire Sorcerer, you'll then be able to steal that opponent's Ash Blossom from the graveyard, and if you wanted to, you could link them away and go into Vampire Sucker, go into Crystal Halley Firebrax, do whatever you want with it. It also then puts a Ash Blossom back in the graveyard that should your opponent try to Ash Blossom you during their turn or during the next turn, your Void can negate it. Very good card when it's used correctly, and this is why I've kind of gone for the assumption or the plays that in order to bring him out, you don't mind hitting a hand trap head on. We then move on to probably the more consistent and the best vampire in the main deck, and that is of course Scarlet Scourge. Now, if this was a level 4, it would be beyond amazing. It's probably what it should have been. It is a level 6. If it is normal or specialed, you pay 1,000 life points to target a vampire monster in your graveyard, except himself, and special summon it, but it cannot attack this turn. Only use this effect once per turn, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card destroyed any monster or monsters by battle, you can special summon them from the graveyards to your field. Now, obviously, if you have the way of making this guy attack more than once, you do have the ability to literally clear off your opponent's board and then bring them all back to your side for links during your turn. Now, it would have been really cool if it made them a zombie, because then it kind of has that feeling of like a vampire's drain and a vampire's kind of infection. But nonetheless, there are easy ways, like I said, to get this out as a normal summon, to get this out as a special summon. You've got ways to play around it. Now the card that is even more relevant now because of Void and of course everything else is the Vampire Sorcerer. Now, I'm testing it at 2 at this moment in time. A lot of the cards that you are playing are designed to put Vampire Sorcerer into the graveyard. You don't want its first effect, which is if this card is in your possession, is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card, relying on your opponent, you can add a dark vampire monster or a vampire spell trap from your deck to your hand. Cool if it happens, but I'm not relying on that effect to resolve. I'm actually relying more on, you can banish this card from the graveyard, one dark vampire monster you can normal summon this turn can be summoned without tributes. Now, it doesn't give you an additional normal, keep that in mind, that is very important. You still need to use your normal summon. But what that allows you to do is bring down Scourge, and it also allows you to bring down Void without actually doing anything. You don't need the tributes to do it. Now the reason I'm playing around with 2 is because I don't really want to have it in my hand. The only card that's in my hand that I would normal summon that's in my hand that would get rid of this is going to be a Uni-Zombie. And again, I don't want to rely on my Uni-Zombie because unless I have Uni-Zombie and Domain, I'm not going to get an additional normal summon to utilise this effect the same turn. And with the speed of the way the Yu-Gi-Oh game is going and the way the Yu-Gi-Oh game is, it's going to be difficult to rely on this going next turn if you don't have the other components in play. So there's a lot of factors to play around with. I'm trying to keep it in the deck. Yes, you can play free if you want to, but like I said, you're playing a lot of cards that are pretty much sending it to the graveyard. You've got ways of getting it from your hand to the graveyard as well, but not as consistent as just generally sending it from the deck to the grave. Again, another real big change that not a lot of people are doing is I'm actually playing 2 Retainer and 2 Familiar. Now, again, this is all testing phases at the moment, so arguably you could be looking to bump these up at 3. The reason these are only at 2s is, again, because of the particular type of build that I am playing, the play and the design is actually to send these from the deck to the grave. I don't want to be using these as my normal summon of the deck. My normal summon of the deck should be Uni-Zombie. Uni-Zombie then allows these to be more effective. So, they both have the same effect in a sense that if they are special summoned, you pay 500 life points. Now, the Familiar will add a vampire monster from your deck to your hand, except itself, and the Retainer will add a vampire spell or trap from your deck to your hand for 500. Then, also in the graveyard, you can send one vampire card from your hand or face up from the field to the graveyard to special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field, and the exact same is for Familiar. So again, I kind of actually want them in the graveyard. The only one that has a normal summon and get to the graveyard quite easily is going to be Familiar, because obviously there's no real way of putting Retainer in the graveyard on his own because he is annoyingly a level 2 and his attack is above 1000, so it can't even be used for Almirage. Whereas Familiar, of course, can be Link Karibo, can be Relinquish Anima. So if you do play those, and I will go through the extra deck and some alternative options as well, then that is what you can do in order to make Familiar more consistent. On the other side of that as well, Familiar is a 1-for-1 target, and the 1-for-1 target is even better because it can obviously put your Sorcerer into the graveyard and special summon out your Familiar. Because the Familiar has been special summoned, you can then trigger the effect to then get you a vampire monster. Now, it would have been so much better if Familiar was the level 1 and Retainer was less than 1000, or vice versa, and Retainer was the level 1 that searches you out the spells and traps, because the vampire spells and traps are actually pretty nuts. We then play a lot of one-offs. Now, the reason I've gone with the one-offs of the vampires is because they are heavy levels. Like I tried to say, that I want my normal summons to be coming off of the back of Sorcerer being in the graveyard, or coming off of Uni-Zombie to then set up the graveyard with Mizuki, Solitaires, and even my Synchro plays as well. So for the one-offs, we've got the 1 Vampire. The issue with this is it's great going first because you don't get to attack anyway, but it's kind of restricting doing any other time. So it can't be used as material for an XYZ summon except the XYZ of a dark monster. It is specifically a level 5. When it is normal summoned, you get to special summon a dark vampire monster from your hand or deck except himself. That's amazing, but monsters you control cannot attack for the rest of the turn except that special summon monster. So unless the monster you're bringing from your deck is incredible, you're not going to win the game from that one play. The idea is that whatever Shadow Vampire brings out, for example, brings out Familiar, brings out Retainer, they will then get an additional effect. So, bring out Retainer, use the effect, paying 500 life points to search one of the vampire spells and traps, which could of course be Domain. Link these two into Vampire Sucker, and then you can start making your plays from that point on. The other one that we play is Freulen. Freulen is probably one of the first ones you could arguably bump up to 2 if you wanted to. But again, you're going to get to it when you want it. There's a lot of searchability in this deck and a lot of consistent ways to get to it. So when a monster declares an attack, you can special summon this card from the hand in defense position. So just when a monster declares at any point. You can only use this effect of Freulen once per turn, and then once per battle, if your zombie monster battles an opponent's monster during the damage calculation. Quick effect, you pay life points in multiples of 100 to maximum of 3,000. Your battling monster gains that much attack during damage calculation only. At the end of the battle phase, if this card destroys any monster by battle, you can special summon it from the graveyard. But the obvious issue is she only has 600 attack. But the loss of life points is not the end of the world as long as you've got Domain in play, because then each time your vampire monster specifically inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you gain that much life points as well. I really do think that to keep these two separate between the zombies and the vampires, it would have been really cool if vampires were their own type. But that's just my wishful thinking. The final vampire monster that we play is a Vampire Vamp, and of course you do get the new alternate art, and the alternate art is basically this little midriff which is grey. Is not actually grey, it's just skin colour. So, again, once per turn, when this card or a vampire monster is normal summoned to your side of the field, again, specifically normal summon, so keep in mind that the way you're going to normal summon this card out is probably going to be from banishing Sorcerer, and then you still need to have Domain to then use another normal summon to specifically normal summon a vampire monster, which will probably be something like Familiar, in order to then trigger the effect. So it's very, very important. And the other thing with Sorcerer as well is that it specifically says one dark vampire monster. So you would need to have 2 in the graveyard, which is great because it's not a hard once per turn, to banish both to then use and abuse both high level vampires. But the idea behind Vamp is that Vamp would be if you normal summon Familiar, or you normal summon the Retainer, which is something you don't really want to do, but if it happens, it happens. You then get to target a face-up monster your opponent controls, so again relies on your opponent having a monster with higher attack than this card, and you get to equip it to this card. This card's attack becomes equal to the combined original attack of both the monster equipped to it and itself, and if it is sent to the graveyard while equipped with a card by this effect, you get to special summon this card from the graveyard. So the good thing about that is you can technically go, right, okay, steal your opponent's monster, link this off with the additional normal summon of Familiar or Retainer, go into Vampire Sucker, trigger the effect of Vamp, Vamp will then come back, and then I believe it's only a soft once per turn, so you'll then get to trigger the effect again, which is really kind of cool. You just need to get her onto the board. Then we go into the zombie engine. So this is the one that keeps it competitive and kind of ties everything together. And that's triple Uni-Zombie. Not much more needs to be said about Uni-Zombie, but you're going to be able to send Mizukis, your Sorcerers. You're going to be able to set up your graveyard for Vampire plays, for Synchro plays, for Shirinu plays. You name it, you've got it. And then, of course, triple Mizuki. You could probably put this at 2 and put in a single Gozuki as well. But with Mizuki, the idea is most of your vampires want to be normal summons specifically. So that's why you want to try and avoid using Mizuki to bring them back. But Mizuki does give you the ability to loop Uni-Zombie. Also, keep in mind that Uni-Zombie can make itself a level 5. So that does give you consistency with your Shadow Vampire should you want to make rank 5s. But on top of that, Uni-Zombie can make any of your monsters go up a level as well, meaning you can make Shadow Vampire 6, which is going to help extend your rank 6 plays. We've then got, to finish off the zombie engine, 2 Shiranui Solitaire. You only need 2 because of the way we're playing this deck specifically. You want to try and keep this at a minimal level where at all possible. The final monster that we are maining is, of course, Ash Blossom. Now, the reason this is so good is it is a vampire, it is a tuner. So the tuner ability, like I said, if Uni-Zombie was to make any of your level 4s a level 5, using your Ash Blossom as a tuner, as it is a zombie, can be brought back from the graveyard with Mizuki, gives you instant access or more consistent access to your Synchro level 8s. Not to mention, again, if this is in the graveyard and Void is on the board, Void will then be able to go, you know what, negate that Ash Blossom your opponent's just tried to activate on my Uni-Zombie. So it does give you a couple of variations. It is, of course, going to be the best hand trap around right now, and it is the most consistent. So you need to take all of those into consideration when putting this deck together. But in my opinion, Ash is a no-brainer. Now, like I said, I've tried to stay away from Vampire Zombie World, and I didn't play Kingdom because the build is not designed to be sending cards from your opponent's deck. I think it's a bit of an issue when you're making your opponent send cards from their deck, because then they can set up their plays. Yes, Kingdom will let you get a pop, but is it worth what they're about to send to the graveyard? So, for draw power, now I'm not seeing a lot of draw power in most people's deck, which is, again, slightly understandable. I've gone with Extravagance. You can play Prosperity, and if you don't have either of these, you can, of course, play Allure of Darkness, because your entire deck, apart from Ash Blossom and Mizuki, and of course Shiranui, are all darks. So you've got a decent bit of draw power, and the reason I went with Extravagance over anything else is because straight away, you play it as your first card. You're then going to be able to bait out an Ash, which means that as long as you've got the ability of, for example, get into Domain, normal summon Unizombie, send a Sorcerer, bring down Void. Void then has the ability to negate Ashes from that point on. And it can also revive said Ash. But on top of that as well, it is the +1. Now with the Prosperity, yes, you've got more control over the extra deck. And again, as I get to the extra deck, I'll explain each card I've chosen and go through it bit by bit. So Prosperity lets you choose, whereas Extravagance is completely random. And if you can, because of Void and you do have some boss monsters in the main deck, you don't need to rely heavily on the extra deck, and the only cards you'll be maxing out on are the ones that are important, so it does give you a bit of freedom. Then, of course, the best vampire spell, in my opinion, is Vampire's Domain. So once per turn, you pay 500 life points during your main phase this turn. You normal summon a vampire monster in addition to your normal summon or set, even if this card leaves the field. Each time your vampire monster inflicts battle damage to your opponent, gain the same amount of life points. Very good card. Gives you decent swings and roundabouts. Love the artwork as well. But the idea behind this is you don't mind playing 1,000 life points for Scourge. You don't mind playing for Froylan, because you're going to be able to get it back with Domain. And Domain is giving you that additional normal summon that should you not open up this or a way to get to this and Unizombie, you're in Dreamland. Because then the idea would be Unizombie, normal summon, send Sorcerer from deck to the grave. Sorcerer is going to give you the ability to normal summon a vampire, and then you can activate Domain to get you an additional normal summon for that turn. So then all you need to do is be able to get to the Void or get to any other of the big vampires you might need, even Shadow, to then banish the Sorcerer, give you an additional normal summon. Shadow can then special from your deck. Straight away you can then make a link to a Vampire Sucker. That's when you start getting more draw power, even before you've even touched the Extravagance. If you've touched the Extravagance, you still make Vampire Sucker because you still have the ability to draw should a card come back from the graveyard, which is quite easy to do, and it gives you more consistency. Then we go on to another Vampire's Desire. Again, artworks on the vampire cards, I have to say, are probably some of the best artworks in the entire game. Just because how dark and menacing they look, but also the detail. I mean, look at the blood red moon, the wings, the scythe, and then this one you've got the cloak, or specifically Scourge, turning from bats into himself, or himself into bats, and you've got the smoke in the background. Beautiful. Anyway, so activate one of these effects. You target a face-up monster you control. You send a vampire monster from your deck to the graveyard with a different level from that monster. And if you do, that targeted monster becomes the level of that sent monster. So you can reduce your Vampire Shadow to a level 4 by sending a Sorcerer to the graveyard. So if you have the ability for an additional normal summon, you just banish and get an additional normal. Plus Shadow is going to bring one from the deck, which means you can then open up Dark Rank 4 plays, and you can start using him for your Synchro level 8 plays. Beautiful. The other ability is target a vampire monster in your graveyard, send a monster you control to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon that targeted monster. Only activate one per turn. For a bit of spice, we are playing Reasoning. Now the reason we're playing Reasoning is because not only can it count as a Foolish Burial in the deck, but it also counts as a technical free summon. Now obviously the consistent one that your opponent could call would be level 4s. And considering you're playing your Vampire Sorcerer, plus your Mizuki and your Shiranui, that is going to be the most highly sought after number. But keep in mind, you're also playing 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, and 8s as well. So your Void is, of course, an 8. Your Vampire, Shadow Vampire is a 5. Your Scourge is a 6. Your Froylan is a 5. Your Vampire is, your Vampire Vamp is a 7. So you're pretty much covering every single level that you need. So Reasoning just becomes a free summon. Yes, some of your vampires want to specifically be normal summoned, but still getting them to the board for free is amazing. For the other ones, of course, we've got the 1 for 1 for your Familiar and the 1 Foolish Burial. Onto the traps, we do play 2 Domination. Again, look at this artwork. Like, just look at that. Absolutely incredible. So, good job whoever was the artist on this one. When a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated while you control a vampire monster, negate the activation. If you do, destroy it. Then, if it was a monster card, gain life points equal to its original attack. Nice. Only use it once per turn. Double Vampire Awakening. Again, artwork stunning. Would have loved to see this as a secret. Special summon a vampire monster from your deck, but destroy it during the end phase of this turn. So, basically, if you need to get a Sorcerer from your deck to the graveyard, activate this, bring it to the graveyard, probably protect it, or let it get destroyed, and then destroy it during the end phase. Great, you've got your setup for your next turn. And then finally, double Crackdown. Because you have an insane card in your extra deck that basically says, if you control a monster that is from your opponent, you can make it a level 6 and use it as material. So Crackdown not only gives you a form of interruption, whether it be specifically to try and make your vampire Sheridan, or whether it's just to disrupt your opponent, it does give you a very cool edge on your opponent. It is a 42 card deck, so if you wanted to, you could cut Crackdown out, but you could also consider stuff, like I said, with Gozukis, Mind Controls, as well as Super Polys, and of course your Vampire Kingdom alongside your Zombie World as well. Now, moving on to the extra deck, this isn't the final extra deck for this particular build. It all comes down to your extravagance play. Now, if you're playing extravagance, the cards I would max out on would be your Dampier Sheridan. It would possibly also be your Vampire Sucker. And then you'd probably be looking at some of your level 8 Synchro, so whether you want to be going for a range or whether you want to be going for specific cards as well. Anyway, in this particular build, I am playing 2 Vampire Sheridans at this moment in time. So this is the card that requires 2+ level 6 monsters, but if you use a monster or monsters with a level that is owned by your opponent for the XYZ summon this card, you can treat it as a level 6. Once per turn, you can detach a material from this card, and then detach a material from this card, then target 1 card that your opponent controls and send it to the graveyard. So yes, it targets, but you're just sending it, not destroying it. Nice. And then once per turn, this card, you can target 1 of your opponent's cards, sent to the graveyard, and then if a monster card is sent from the field to your opponent's graveyard by a card effect, or a monster is destroyed by battle and sent to your opponent's graveyard, you detach a material and you get to special summon them to your field in defense position. So I'd actually max out on Sheridan. I think he is your best card to go to, and that's where Void comes into so much play, because if Void brings back 2 monsters, so even if it's an Ash Blossom and a Fet Veiler, you can overlay both of those into a Vampire Sheridan. We're currently rocking 2 Vampire Suckers because of the extravagance, and even Prosperity. You can't draw more, so Vampire Sucker is going to become less relevant, but it's still an incredibly good Link 2 to go to. I've done this in a little bit of a weird way, but we'll go through it as we've got. For the level 8 Synchros, Savage Dragon, your best defensive one right now. Your Aggressor for Shogun Saga to get up to anywhere from up to 58, I believe, because you just banish a zombie, it gains that much attack. Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, I just like nuking the board, burning for life points, and if I've already gained life points, I'm going to be in a very good position. Omega, only weakness of playing something like Extravagance is if you lose your Omega, that's it, you don't have anything more. But the abilities of Omega to be able to put your banished Mizukis back in, but it can also put your Extravagance cards back into the graveyard, so if you have the ability to shuffle them back, for example, playing something like Pot of Avarice, then you can do that as well. Then a very good level 8 Synchro that, again, I'm surprised not a lot of Vampire players are playing, is the Chaos Dragon. Now, the reason this is so good is if it is Synchro so good, you get to excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, and if you do, you get to add an excavated light or dark monster to your hand. You get to send the remaining cards to the graveyard. You can banish a light and dark monster to from your hand and or graveyard to revive this card. Now, obviously, I'm not going to try and revive it because I am relying on a lot of dark monsters. If I wanted to try and revive it, I'll probably put a bit more light monsters in my extra deck or play something like Ghost Ogre and a Fet Veiler. But the idea is that on summon, he's going to excavate 5 cards, which is technically a 4-card Foolish Burial for the deck, and you get to add a dark. So I think the consistency, and it does its job incredibly well, is definitely there. For the rest of the XYZs, we've got the 1 Jinzo Laird, just for the ability that it lets you steal one of your opponent's monsters, and it can pop a card if there's a trap on the field. So you've got your Crackdown there as well, so that gives you the ability to go, okay, cool, I've stolen your opponent's monsters, I've used it as overlay material, the Crackdown is still there, it hasn't floated off, or the Crackdown's still active, pop the Crackdown, pop one of your opponent's monsters, or pop the monster I've stolen, and pop that. You've then got your Utopia Beyond, just the ability to pretty much go, right, okay, turn all my opponent's monsters' attacks to 0, and even using my weaker cards, so you look at stuff like Froylan, this is where it comes into play. Froylan can then attack for 500. If I've got Domain in play, I'm going to gain 500 life points. But Froylan, after the battle phase, will then start reviving all of these cards she's destroyed. So will Scourge, so will Beyond. So if you haven't won the duel from that point on, you then steal all of your opponent's monsters, link them up, go into something like an Appaloosa if you want to go that route, also go into a Boral Sword, and continue from there. The other XYZs, we do have the Abyss Dweller and the Tornado Dragon, just for those staple options. If you don't feel that you're going to be facing any heavy back row matchups or any matchups that these are going to be relevant in, you can take them out quite easily. Because we're playing a lot of XYZs, of course, Zeus, but we are playing Extravagant, so unless you own like 2 or 3 Zeuses, you probably don't want to play him, but you can easily take Zeus out. And then the final card is Boral Sword, just for those abilities of being able to go, right, okay, Vampire Sucker, bring back a zombie card because I've used Mizuki, bring back another one, make Boral Sword, banish Sorcerer from the graveyard, bring down a Void, Void's on 28, Boral Sword's 3k, Boral Sword's attacking twice, Void's attacking once for 28, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, you've pretty much picked up game there. So that's it for absolutely everything that I'm playing at the moment. Here are some other suggestions for the extra deck. Because it's a Vampire deck, you kind of want to play Vampiric Dragon. Now, this is really confusing because it's got Vampiric Dragon, Bitsylvium. So, still an incredibly good card, looks amazing. If you're like, right, I only want to play a Vampire focus deck, then this is one you want to go for. The exact same can be said for the Crimson Knight of Vampire Bram. Again, if you're going specifically for vampires, you'd put this one straight in. Other little tech cards that I've seen people play, or people that cards that I think should be played, if you're considering to go a different route, is Crystal and Halifibrax. So if you actually bring back your opponent's Ash Blossom or a Fet Veiler with your Void, you can then go into Halifibrax. Halifibrax can then bring you a Uni-Zombie from deck, and then you can make your plays to climb up a little bit higher. It's very specific, which is why it's not actually in the extra deck itself for this particular build, but it's something that you can consider that if you wanted to be a little bit spicy, you could put in. You've got your IP Masquerena, which of course will lead into your Nightmare Unicorn, but it will also lead into your Underworld Goddess of the Closed Worlds. Just a little card like that, because again, I think it's very easy to get 3 monsters on the board, or Vampire Sucker plus a monster. So then if you're able to steal some of your opponent's monsters or anything like that, Underworld Goddess is a very, very good card to help you then continue on. We've already really talked about Appaloosa, a very good card that you can build up to with Vampire Sucker, with all your other cards as well, Mizuki's, so it is something to consider. And then finally, the one Bill is a Diabolical Dragon. Again, I think the game has moved on past Bills being as stoppable as everything else, but it does give you another level 8 synchro option. Also, you can consider the Super Poly targets, play Super Poly in the deck as well. Definitely does give you a bit of a more competitive edge, and putting Zombie World into the deck as well can really, really help give you that additional edge. But that being said, that really does come down to the playstyle that you want to play, where you're taking it. You've also got stuff like Jacko Bolan, and it depends on if you're like, right, I want it to be a vampire deck, or I want it to be a zombie deck. So that's entirely up to you. I still think it's an incredibly fun deck. Absolutely love some of the vampire artwork, like I've mentioned. And I think the deck has got a nice little boost off of Void, but I would really like to see more vampire cards, just to kind of make it so it's their own deck, so they don't need to rely on Uni-Zombie, Mizuki and stuff like that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. If you want to see this used in a duel, or of course want to see some test times of it, please smash that like button and get it to at least 50 likes in the first 24 hours. With all of that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. As absolutely always, guys, stay safe and happy dueling.